All right, greetings, everybody. Apologies for the delay with a little technical difficulties this morning. Welcome to today's keynote for Stronger. My name is Mike Donaldson. I'm the Senior Director of Cyber Risk Services here at CyberSaint, and I'm joined with a couple of my colleagues here, Cameron Johnson, Chris Thorpe. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? Let's start with Cameron.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Cam Johnson, former BSO at Warner Brothers and now a consulting application security engineer. Pleasure to meet you guys.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Thorpe, Senior Director of Cybersecurity focused on GRC and Identity and Access Management at Cox Enterprises in Atlanta.
All right, it's great to be with you all this morning. So before we jump into our deep dive, let's talk a little bit about some of the fundamental blocking and tackling that organizations should have in place as they prepare for emerging threats related to artificial intelligence and zero trust architecture. Cameron, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about how quality data and process is a necessity for artificial intelligence.
Cool. So if you're going on a journey to try to get into AI, I would say the fundamentals I think of immediately are how does your inventory look? What does your CMDB look like? How are you tying your assets together? Do the actual, what are the vectors that you're looking for to utilize AI? Are they digitized? So if you want to make an AI compliance tool, is that policy actually able to be manifested programmatically into your system and is available and readily available to use from your engineering team? So you need to have your house in order before you can think of large scale AI solutions, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's just a follow-up to that. You talk about CMDB. One of the challenges I see in organizations is they either lack enterprise architecture program or the ability to, just capture and manage all the organizational info. How can we as security leaders influence maturity with enterprise data?
What I'll tell you is so in my past as a BSO, what I will often do is I employed the strategy of taking advantage of what was going on to get what I needed. So anytime there was a large scale program involving asset data, involving engineers, I would always throw in a point, hey, if they want to get out of this, make them register into the CMDB. If they want to become compliant, make them register into the CMDB. So that's one thing you need to have that agenda in the back of your mind at all times in any chances you can, make them register it. And then on the other side, you need to close the gap. And so a good example of that is, I've spent a lot of time, securing repositories and code bases. And so how is that process stood up? Make sure that process programmatically includes that repo into the CMDB going forward so that it can never not be present again. So you have to close these gaps, excuse me, to where you can probably find the issues at in the first place.
Yeah, that's definitely a great approach. Let's say we fail to influence. What do you think about, and I've seen this happen before where, they just want to keep the CMDB operational, but in security, we need profiles that have attributes that we can leverage for what we're doing. If we start to, and I've seen this debate as a hot topic, if we start to create our own profiles, our own asset profiles, do you think that's going rogue or do you think that's just something just we might need to do out of necessity?
I think it's something out of necessity. You document the risk in your risk register. You tell your leadership when your CISO goes to wherever they need to go to, hey, this team isn't giving me what I need, so I'm going to do it myself. That's absolutely necessary. And so I've seen it done with repos. I've seen it done with servers before. You need to have a way to tie events back to actual objects to actually resolve them. It's a necessity to have your program, and you can't be effective without it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Chris, let me turn to you now. So, if we have the type of challenges with business alignment that Cameron and I are just speaking of, I think the root of it is just the inability to find common ground with our business stakeholders. And, from your perspective, talk to us how to best align with the business and identify their objectives and the risks as kind of the why behind what we're trying to accomplish with them.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think it's important to take it all the way back to the fundamentals of the business that you're in. What is the mission and the charge of that organization? How do you make money? You have to do a value mapping exercise to understand what are the things, what are the processes, what are the assets that actually allow us to generate revenue. If you don't have that understanding, then you're not going to be able to find that commonality because each of us we're mired in our function, right? And so we want to be able to complete our task list, right? We're not thinking strategically most times on a day-to-day. People are very operational and tactical. So you have to be able to come into the conversation with, hey, it's important for us to take on this initiative because this is how it impacts our ability to be a going concern. This is how it impacts our quarterly revenue targets. This is how it impacts our risk profile, our exposure to loss of assets and proprietary data. Everyone loves to talk about the Samsung incident where they had their code in a large language model. But as funny as that may seem from an anecdotal standpoint, like if we're not understanding that that data is a critical asset and we need to all work to protect it, that's how these things happen. Now, our data may not be in a large language model, but it may be somewhere you don't want it to be because the parties that are responsible for protecting it from the business through technology through security may not be aligned on what are the right controls. And controls aren't always technical, right? We have to talk about administrative controls. I feel like one of the things we're failing at is the people aspect. So one of the things we've done at Cox is stood up what I would like to call a next gen human risk management program, where we're integrating with things like the Microsoft stack and our productivity suites to understand people's behavioral patterns and then injecting knowledge bites, real time or near real time, to coach them to make a different or better decision in the future if they are interacting and sharing data. We can't keep throwing more tools and layering tools and expect our data to be safe because most times, frankly, we don't really get to implementing to the point of extracting ROI. We deploy and then we go away. And then it's the next thing. But if we can get to the standpoint of truly going back to understanding what did we say we were going to derive when we bought this tool? And are we actually meeting that definition of done? Are we actually realizing the return on investment that was proposed when we went to ask for the money to deploy that? That's why security budgets are getting cut. It's because we're not actually executing on the strategic efforts that we promised when we bought the tool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you don't mind asking a follow up on that, when you talk about some of
Sure.
the the human risk management and some of the coaching you're doing, what are some of the coaching methods? Is it do you have any positive reinforcement baked in there, or is it just kind of a mix of what does that look like tangibly? It's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, so we try to lead with positivity. We've learned through research, and honestly, we spent about 3 years researching what are the right things, what's actually moving the bar with people. What we learned is negative prompts don't really help. Making someone feel like they've made a really bad choice is not the way to go about it. So we try to inject proactive knowledge on a frequent basis. We send out our phishing campaigns. And that phishing campaign, if you click something wrong, we don't say you're a bad person. We'll come back and say, hey, good attempt, but you missed this. Something that you can do in the future to recognize further indicators. And then if we notice the person is not getting better, we'll continue to introduce proactive messaging and education bites in the form of small videos or maybe an email periodically prior to them getting a phishing campaign. So we don't always bring it with the campaign message. It's throughout the month. Let's give you a little knowledge bite here, a little knowledge bite there. If we notice they're getting really bad, we'll ask them to come over and just take a quick 15-minute refresher on certain key points. But it is aligned to where they are failing, not just a general overview. So many programs are focused on a 20-minute course per year. We want to inject education every week, every month for all of you in your different contexts of how you do your work. And if you don't understand people's work and their business process, you don't know what information to deliver to them. We cannot generalize our knowledge bites around these things. We have to make it relevant to the person and the function that they perform. And that's a key reason why business email compromise is so successful. If you don't understand the business process of how this person gets their job done every day, how can you educate them on how to detect and avoid a business email compromise?
Yeah, I love it. It makes perfect sense. I love the leading with positivity. And these are all great points so far when we think about foundations for preparing for these emerging risks around enterprise data and process, aligning with our business objectives, and helping our people get enabled to be prepared for these and to be diligent as well. So let's start and discuss more specifically some of the ways that security teams should consider some of these emerging risks and threats. And Cameron, I'll start with you. So what are you seeing just generally as some of the top risks and threats when it comes to artificial intelligence?
I would say a lot of it comes from not really understanding how to sanitize and properly use your data from a enterprise level. And so your employees are going to use AI. You need to get ahead of that. And as Chris says, find a very specific way to communicate that information to your stakeholders in effective manners. Because and so the clientele, like your engineers are going to use AI, whether it's OpenAI, Copilot, Claude. Figure out how to say, hey, we have our own instance for this. Or if you're going to use it, make sure that the code is sanitized before you put it in there. Make sure you don't have access to our URLs, because if something does happen, we will be exposed because of this, you know. So you need to be very careful with that. And so that's one thing I educate folks on when it comes to dealing with AI in regards to an engineering standpoint.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, our employees are going to use it regardless. And so security professionals, how do you think we should start to look at incorporating AI, to mitigate threats and risks with AI? For example, what would you tell an organization that wants to leverage AI? They kind of want to go from 0 to 60, but they're not even doing, rule-based automation yet, whether it's like RPA or machine learning. What are some like tactical use cases and ways that we can start thinking about how to leverage AI for security purposes?
I think I would say it's a multi-part process. So it is akin to designing effective software. You know, I started out as a software engineer, so that's what I kind of related to. So it's akin to designing effective software. So first you need to understand, do I actually have a use case where contextual AI is necessary? If this is something that will never be human readable, maybe consider using machine learning beforehand, because machine learning is it's just as effective, it's necessary. You maybe don't need to do it as much of an investment because AI can be very expensive as well too. So understanding if you have a use case, understanding who your users are, what are their complaints, how are those points that you're looking for actually digitized in your environment. So if you're looking to make a DLP, AI-based DLP solution, do you have that policy actually written out anywhere programmatically so that your AI can observe that type of knowledge and make recommendations from there? So making sure your data is where it needs to be at as well too. What is that validation mechanism going to be? So what do you want to actually happen from beginning to end? So you need to really sit down and actually make sure that you have a nice, clear, and concise product that is going to be necessary. Treat it like you're making a new software. And then from there, it's all about, once you have your use cases, you start figuring out what the value proposition is for people. So let's say, for instance, you're a director of an application security engineering team, and you're looking to create something that allows engineers to produce secure code without you having to intervene as consistently. So before it ever gets to the scan pipeline, before it ever gets to GitHub, how do you want to do this? That's one set of users. You want to also make it so that these engineers can make policy-based changes, because I think any security leader that has a high level understanding knows they do not know everything. And sometimes the engineers will know more than you. And so they need to actually have a solution that may be, inherently out of line with your current policy. So then how does AI react to need necessary policy changes? How does AI going to help them design a solution that fits in alignment and test for your policy changes as well too? So it is a long-term process there. And then once you kind of figure out you actually have a solution that is needed and is going to have value proposition, you then have to get into the infrastructure portion of this as well too, because AI requires a lot of processing power, so it can get very expensive very quickly. So you need to really understand how you want to implement, deploy, and maintain this as an operational function, because no security program is going to just say, hey, I'm just going to buy an OpenAI enterprise license. No, you're going to create a custom GPT and you're going to store it somewhere so that your information does not leak out. And so I think you need to be able to really thoroughly think about how you want to design this, create a product, and then maintain it in your house. And if you have the funds to actually do that too.
Yeah, that's great advice, and I can definitely resonate with that. Spending the last 5 years at Dell, I think a lot of people don't think about the infrastructure ramifications and costs, and I can tell you firsthand that that's definitely a critical piece of it for sure. So let's talk about a different emerging risk and threat. Let's talk a little bit more about zero trust. And Chris, I think we'd all acknowledge that artificial intelligence has been out there, talked about in the news and various forums for a year and a half. I think it's pretty saturated as far as, but I think we don't hear as much about zero trust architecture and what that is. So if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick elevator pitch on what is zero trust? Why do we need it?
Yeah, so I would say, Mike, I feel like we stopped talking about zero trust once we all got past VPN and were able to have zero trust network access. Everybody talked about it while we were trying to figure out how to get connected back to our data centers. But now it's fallen out of the light due to AI being such a big focus. But zero trust is about just getting rid of implicit trust with anything in your technology environment. So protecting your workloads, whether they be in the cloud or on-prem, um, understanding your data assets and making sure that they are segmented away from other things. The network layer, providing network access to those who need it, to only the resources they need. And for me, I'm a little partial, but the identity aspect is the number one piece of zero trust. You've got to be able to understand what Cameron needs access to. What does he do in his work context day to day? Or are we just giving him implicit access to everything in the IT environment because he works in the technology department? We've got to break those paradigms and move back to clear role-based access. So many companies really don't have a solid RBAC model, and they haven't deployed RBAC fully throughout their enterprise. That's really going to be step one for beginning a zero trust journey. You got to know who needs access to what. Then once you advance beyond the roles, you need to understand attributes. Okay, Cameron needs to do status reports and expense reports periodically. So we need to assign him an attribute that in real time can grant him access to the status reporting system and the financial expense reporting system when he finishes a trip. We've got to evolve to those layers of levels of understanding about our infrastructure and our environment and our people. If you don't have good, solid identity practices and governance, I don't want to say you should avoid zero trust, but get that figured out before you implement some huge zero trust program, because you'll spend $1 million getting an assessment done and then won't really have the ability to start in earnest because you'll figure out you're so far behind. So where we began with this conversation this morning, understanding your fundamentals, getting your building blocks solid, then determining, okay, what problems do I need to solve? What are the critical assets I need to protect? What's the critical data that's important for my business to thrive and keep going? When you identify and classify and label those things, now you can bring in your architecture, your enterprise architecture team, and your cybersecurity architecture team, and your infrastructure and platform automation people, and your data people to begin looking at how do we work together to design a comprehensive program to implement zero trust in phases, of course, to help our organization improve our security posture. Most of us don't have the luck of being greenfield and saying, all right, I've got a brand new business. I want to deploy things as securely as possible. Let me go to one of the hyperscalers and leverage what they've already done around zero trust to build my infrastructure. Most of us are operating in what I call a brownfield environment. You got a bunch of legacy stuff, some of it on-prem, some of it in the cloud. We're all still trying to figure out, okay, are we going cloud only? Are we going to stay hybrid? We're going to have a mixture. So the reality is you need to develop design patterns and architectural models that allow you to implement zero trust in all of the places you are for all of the things that you do, to make sure that you are removing implicit trust and forcing people to verify who they are, forcing assets to be uh, risk scored as they attempt to access different APIs and data flows. Just allowing everything that sits in your data center to talk to everything else is bad juju. We can't do that anymore. Lateral movement is destroying people because we're not segmenting data. So we need to get to the point where all of the technical teams are talking about zero trust and not just security. That's going to require you having a strong security champions program so that your developers begin understanding what zero trust is. And on that point, we've really got to stop beating up developers, right? We want to come to them and say, bad developer, you're designing insecure code. But none of us are really thinking about the fact that they did a 4-year computer science program and probably didn't have one course on information security or secure code development. So can we really be mad at them? Or should we be mad at the pipeline that is creating these software developers that don't understand security? Partner with them, work with your platform automation teams and your infrastructure teams to design secure architectures that are bringing zero trust components into the build process for the developer before they even need to think about it. Everything they deploy to is going to require explicit policy be defined for them to execute the flow the way they need to. Right? Giving developers God permission and saying, go build your own infrastructure, we got to step away from that because you can't maintain that configuration. The other thing is, I think we need to do a better job of doing continuous configuration scans. So one of the things we're working on now is creating dashboards that are going to tell us about our configuration posture near real time on a continuous basis. Continuous assessment programs are cool, but you need to be able to show people where the misconfigurations live. A lot of programs are focused on vulnerability. That's cute, but you also need to talk about, okay, where do I assume something is configured correctly? Because when we deployed it, it was right. But as configuration changes come through your change management process, that posture is going to be impacted. And if you're not regression testing and quality checking and validating that the config still meets your needs or is still in place, you're going to have vulnerabilities that expose you in your configuration. It isn't always just patches. I think we spend too much time talking about patching and not enough on configuration management and validation.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And obviously there's a lot going on there when you think about zero trust architecture. And I liked how you talk about, for most of us, it's brownfield. It's definitely a phased approach where you should start with your critical assets. And let me ask you this. I mean, obviously it's not a one project thing. You're not going to
That's
get
right.
there in one project. It's a multi-year approach. How can organizations best prioritize? Does it make sense to have a risk-based prioritization that focuses
I
on
think so.
return on security investments so you can see some short-term gains with those long-term goals in mind?
I think so. So I think for any project, any program like this, because it's going to be multiple projects, for any program that's this big and this impactful to the organization, start doing your research first, right? Spend some time talking to peer companies, companies in your network, events like this, right? Where you can hear from people that have already had success, people who are on the journey. You need to understand what's happening in the community. And most importantly, understand where people have failed miserably. Where did they spend a bunch of money and it just completely didn't work because they didn't have their ducks in a row when they began? And then once you've got some of those stories, start talking to large partners and consultants who can help you do an assessment of your current situation and help you work to understand what are the quick wins that you can establish in year one to get people bought in and excited. Because you're not doing zero trust in a year. It is going to be multi-year. Some people, it might take 5 years to get there. Some people might do it in 2 or 3, but you've got to be in it for the marathon, not the sprint. In order to keep people engaged, there must be quick wins for every program involved and each wave of that implementation. But starting with the clean assessment and then bringing that back and strategizing what are the right capital investments to make sure we can improve things in a measured way. One of the things I've seen a lot of companies do is they pick a piece of technology and they deploy that technology and they say, oh, yeah, we're doing zero trust. No, that is not a program. That is a tool. And if all of the other pillars of zero trust are not being managed along with it, you have a modern tool, but you are not implementing zero trust in your organization. I brought up the example of zero trust network access at the beginning as a replacement for VPN. Many companies did that and felt like, okay, I'm good. No, there's far more you need to do to really make that initial investment pay off in the long run. So I think the assessment piece and then breaking it down into chunks that you can reasonably achieve, because the reality is nobody's going to be focused on zero trust 100% of their year. So what can you reasonably commit to and keep the business going and be an enabler of new capabilities and functions that are going to help the company continue to make money and increase profits? And as you find things that are new deploy, let's do what I like to call cap and grow. Stop the bad patterns from proliferating. And as new projects come along, figure out how to weave that zero trust architecture and design pattern into the new efforts. And you'll be expanding on the program organically at that point. And you may find that in year 2 or 3, because the design patterns are there, you're moving a large chunk of your infrastructure and your process to zero trust organically. But if you don't understand where to insert these elements, you're going to fail because you'll be so focused myopically on doing a zero trust thing instead of secure by design and zero trust by design.
Yeah, that's all great advice. And I really like one thing that stuck out to me that I really liked how you said is to, look outside your organization, talk to your peers, see where people have failed. And I think that's key. It's a great transition to our next topic, turning the corner. Let's talk more about how, current and aspiring security professionals can get enabled and stay current with all these emerging risks and threats and everything that's rapidly changing. So, Cameron, let's talk about your journey. How did you get started in security? How do you stay current? What advice do you have for security professionals today?
Cool. So I actually have a playbook for this. People call me all the time, and so I can read through the beginning to the end. So I'll tell you about myself. So I started out as a full stack software engineer, but I had a degree in IT security and assurance. And so, as Chris mentioned, the software engineer work and the cybersecurity work did not intersect. I wanted to explore more into cybersecurity, so I started taking up those tasks as part of my team, remediating findings, getting more engaged in the cyber standpoint, just to get an understanding to kind of build that credibility standpoint. Uh, Went and got started to get certified, got a Security Plus certification, began networking. As a younger person, I'm still young. Don't let the bald head fool you, but I started networking internally. Sold myself as somebody that could come into their cyber org and automate things, and that's kind of how I got my first job. And it kind of started to snowball from there, because I think the hardest hurdle for a lot of people trying to get in is getting that first job, getting that credibility, and then kind of going forward from there. And that kind of jump started my career. And so what I would tell people is, if they're trying to get into cybersecurity, there are a few different things you need to have. You need to have credibility, and you need to have experience. So, and there are two different types of experience that you need to occur. And then I'll say the third point is knowledge, I would say as well too. And so from the credibility standpoint, I don't care, it is certifications, it's degree, it's education, whatever you want to do. I actually don't recommend people get cybersecurity degrees, because I don't think it's going to be fruitful early on in your career. I push them to computer science or a direct IT or a data type role instead. So get your credibility. I tell people to get that knowledge, figure out what you want to do first. So I send them to the SANS Cool 20 site and say, look at the top 20 coolest jobs in cybersecurity over the next 2 weeks. Go look at the job posting for that and come back with a list of skills, so you actually know what interests you, and make sure these are entry level jobs. Don't go look for a threat hunter job or a BSO job, because the odds of you getting hired for that are almost zero. Nobody's gonna trust you with that just yet. Go look at sysadmin roles, go look at SOC analyst roles, go look at security analyst roles, all those things where you can get in and kind of get engaged. And then go find what I told you to get the credibility. What certifications are in alignment with that? What skills do you need? Do you need to go to college? Do you need to go to CompTIA? Do you need to go to SANS? Figure that out first. Make that plan there. And then as you're doing that plan, you shouldn't be sitting idle. Go get the experience. So then you go to the tri-hackneys and the hackathons to figure it out, because that's your personal portfolio experience. That's how you sell yourself when you finally get the opportunity to talk to somebody. And then, on the other end, the professional experience, go get a sysadmin job. Go get a job, as a software engineer or a data analyst, and start doing the security configuration tasks to say, hey, this isn't my full-time job, but I can do this. So you build that profile. And I think, from there, the next most important thing is, I think actually the most important thing is your network. Join a professional organization, because everything else before that means nothing. If nobody gives you opportunity, you'll be at home with a pile of certifications in a home lab, and nobody cares about it. And so I tell people all the time, join Cyversity. I'm a member of Cyversity. They paid for one of my SAN certifications. Do great value add, ISACA, DEF CON, get on Meetup and go to meetups for cyber. Find a group of people you can talk to, because you do the most learning when you're just sitting down having a beer with somebody that knows a lot more than you, because then you can actually and effectively do that. And then those opportunities lead me to people like yourself. They give you the chance to talk about the credibility and experience that you have, because if you don't get the opportunity to speak to somebody, unfortunately, I don't agree with this. Unfortunately, a lot of people will not give you a chance in cybersecurity, because I believe there are entry level roles in cyber. I think we have a problem when it comes to recruiting for them and actually giving people a chance in those as well too. So that's my playbook. SANS School 20. Get your certs, network your butt off, home experience, professional experience, and I'm almost certain you'll find something if you're persistent enough.
Yeah, that's all great advice, and I definitely want to drill into
So
one in particular. You talked about, getting your skills, getting your knowledge, and there's so many different skills and types of knowledge that you could possess and leverage. Do you think the more advanced technical skills are neglected these days? I think about things like, get a CCNA because you need to know networking, you need to know
Mhm.
basic TCP/IP protocol, you need
Correct.
some sort of OS certification, you need an
Mhm.
MCSE to be able to navigate the
Mhm.
endpoint if you want to get any
Mhm.
type of, threat hunting or any type of work. So do you think
Mhm.
those are overlooked? And what would you say to that?
I don't think they're overlooked. I think that unfortunately there's a pipeline of cert stacking that requires people to go through the certification route, which keeps a lot of people away. You don't need a certification to learn that stuff. I think network. I think if you want to get a degree, like my background was not in networking, and so I have to learn it through tooth and nail, and it's not easy. Networking is pivotal, crucial to almost any cybersecurity role that you have. Understanding the basics of SDLC are very important. So those fundamentals are extremely useful. And I'll speak to the professionals now. You need to also understand, even though somebody does not have the certification, they may have the capacity to learn those type of things on the job as well too, because some of these concepts are not difficult to grasp. And you need to look for people's mindsets more than what the piece of paper they have in front of them is, because people will search stack for years and be bad employees, and somebody will not be able to contribute the time to search stacking, but have the mindset to pick up what your team is doing operationally as well too. And so, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, no,
Yeah.
perfectly. And I agree. I think, search stacking or there's a number of pitfalls and things that I think security professionals struggle with. And Chris, I'd love to hear your perspective on that is, what are some of the rough areas, things that we can struggle with, and what's your advice for them to either avoid or recover from some of these things, have a more fruitful career long term in security?
yeah, so I don't want to say I disagree with Cameron, but I have a different lens on your pathway into security. I don't feel like anybody should aspire to start in cybersecurity. People are going to be upset with me for saying that, but I don't feel it's effective to try to secure something you don't understand. Cam spoke a lot about relationships and networking. Well, in order to be an effective cybersecurity engineer, analyst, and most especially a leader, I can't get anything done without my business partners and their buy-in to what I want to do. The first generation of cybersecurity and information security, we were seen as the party of no, walking around with a clipboard telling everybody what they couldn't do. This generation, the wave I came into, is very much focused on being a partner and an enabler. I don't want people sweating bullets when I walk into their office. I want them to welcome me and see me as a thought partner, and I've been successful in doing that over the last 5 years. Um, but it took some time because people are very accustomed to being punished and scolded for something they did wrong. But when we changed tack to start having proactive conversations, things got easier. Now, for those starting out, go find a technical job. Go find a business analyst role supporting something like an ERP system, a HR system, the financial platforms. Figure out what are the wheels that make your business spin. Go become a supply chain and sourcing analyst to understand how deals get put together, how companies go about finding and purchasing the solutions that they need. When you understand how the cogs and the wheels of a business churn, then you can improve your value to the organization by saying, okay, here's where we can insert a secure methodology, or let's add a control to this particular business process that helps to make sure that we're better protecting the data and our proprietary information. That's where our value comes in as information security and cyber professionals. We are protecting people and things, and it's important to understand what those people and things do to be able to actually know what is the right control grouping to bring to them. And I feel like if you don't have the context for how the business runs, your solutions are going to fall on deaf ears because they're just going to say, this guy doesn't even understand what I'm doing. He doesn't understand I need to move $1 million from here to there in 30 minutes or a deal doesn't close. Right. So for me to tell them they got to have MFA with a YubiKey and a phone authorization and a video authorization or validation in order to send that money, I've got to help them appreciate why it's important to add friction to a process that has traditionally just been pick up the phone and send a wire or press a button and send a wire. And if you can't relate to them and express your understanding of their experience and their needs, they're not going to want to see you coming. So having said that, spend some time in a business function. It doesn't mean you're not studying security. I studied security and worked with security teams throughout my entire career to understand and appreciate what they did so that I knew as an early sysadmin, when do I need to engage them? What's the best time to bring them into a project to make sure that I don't end up running into a brick wall in the 11th hour when I need to implement because I didn't think about firewall rules that I need created for my application to talk to another application. Once you begin working through projects and experiencing those difficulties, you start figuring out how to become more efficient in how you operate with people. So understand the core departments of your technical team at your organization. Understand information systems and the patterns of how they work together. So whereas Cam tells people to go get a computer science degree, I like to tell people to go get an information systems degree because it's going to help you understand how to piece everything together. Um, Spend time taking architects to lunch and developers and all the people you are intimidated to talk to because you feel like they're too smart and you just don't understand. You'd be amazed how excited they'll be to share what they know with you over a coffee or a lunch. And you won't have to say much. You can ask 2 or 3 questions and they'll take the whole conversation and off to the races, but you're going to pick things up. And so I fell into security by accident. I was running a desktop engineering team and I met with the CISO and I was like, hey, what can we do on the desktop to improve posture and make things a little bit easier for you? And his eyes went big and he was like, oh my God. Um, if we could work on patching and hardening and do you know about the CIS benchmarks? Went and researched that stuff, started implementing additional controls. We got the project done and he was like, wow, all right, well, what else can we do? Over a 3-year period, we built a relationship and he ended up providing funding to my team for a securities focused headcount, right? So it's being curious and understanding what do other people need. If I'm doing really well and I've got extra cycles in my day to do more work, partner with somebody that needs help in an adjacent function or a boundary partner to figure out how can we job shadow? How can I maybe take on a task that they don't have the capacity to complete but could use the help with? Those are the ways to move into security. So by the time I actually was ready to apply for a security job, I had 3 years of program management experience for security projects that I could put on my resume. So I looked to everyone like a IT operations manager, but I was also an IT cybersecurity program manager. Right, so you've got to figure out ways to weave it in organically, and don't give yourself a 12-month time frame to get into security. That's
Don't do
crazy.
it. Yeah, don't
Set a
do
5-year
it.
plan, figure out what are the entryways, and do things like look at the nice framework that CISA provides that will tell you what are the different domains, what are the skills required to perform at different levels within those domains of security. And that will keep you from getting frustrated because you'll have a punch list of things that you know you have to check off to be able to compete for a job as an identity and access management analyst, as a cyber risk analyst, as a third-party risk management analyst. These are hard targets you can shoot for with very clear requirements without having to go through a certification boot camp and feel like after I get these certs, I'm hireable. No, you are not. That's the beginning. That's where your journey begins because all certs are doing is ensuring that you have a key set of foundational understandings. You got to go work in those things and build experience after that.
Yeah, that's great advice, and I really resonate with the non-traditional entry point into security because that was very much my journey. I started 20 years ago. I was a Salesforce.com admin, and managing one
Okay.
application led me to application portfolio management, which we all know what happened in 2002. So that led me to SOX, and then SOX led me to GRC, and then GRC led me to security, and along the
Exactly.
way, I kind of found my niche, which was more of a just a love for people, collaboration, technology, and to your point, the business process. I was always interested to understand the business process because at the end of the day, let's be honest, like the business process, that's the core of what we do and what drives revenue. All these other things, whether it's HR, IT, security, they're really just support services at the end of the day. So what's the why behind the support? And I kind of fell in love with, risk and compliance because I worked for a Fortune 50 health insurance company, and we leveraged our GRC program to help, do the risk assessment and the implementation planning of the Affordable Care Act. And that had a massive impact on our company to be able to just so seamlessly, manage that massive change in the industry. And so from that just became kind of my niche moving forward. Cameron, let's talk about you. What's been your niche? Like, what have you found that you've just, regardless of what you do in security, what have you kind of latched onto in your career?
Um, what have I latched onto in my career? I would say two different things. Is one, process improvement. I have always just loved making people's lives easier. That's my personality. I do it in my personal life. I do it professionally as well too. So making somebody's life easier. In fact, I didn't tell you this, but when I was the engineer taking up those tasks, from software side, I was very frustrated with dealing with our pen testers. I remember having to get up, at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to talk to the pen testers about what's going on. And they had no clue what my code was doing. They just gave me a report, and I'm like, okay, you can't really help me fix this. And so I'm like, this feels wrong. And so I spent a lot of time learning how to communicate effectively for your cybersecurity programs, not have shelfware like Chris mentioned way earlier, where you buy a tool, think you're done, but it's not really operational and effective to your program. And so my niche is definitely figuring out what your problems are and having a very peaceful conversation to say, hey, how can we come to a good solution here? And then even more so, what I see myself doing in my career is, for right now at least, actually building and designing those automations to make things more effective. Because right now my goal is to make the engineer's life easier, because I have the empathy, because I've been there, and people either hate cybersecurity folks or they like them and they come to you for everything. And you rather be the person that they come to for everything. And so that's what I do. So tools operationalization, provision management, closing that loop, like I said. So if you have a problem where your repos aren't tied to CMDB artifacts, work with that DevOps team to figure out how to get that happen. If you have a, vulnerability management issue where scanners are configured properly, work with the executive of that team to say, hey man, next time you guys do a system upgrade, here's the configuration file ahead of time. So you don't even have to think about it. You just put this in the config and it's done. It's secure. It's off of your radar. Let people know what they're agreeing to and what they're dealing with. I used to have a method of where I would say, okay, here's what you're agreeing to then. And it's not like a threat, but it's, hey, I have told you what's going on. I'd like you to understand the ramifications of this. And if you're okay with it, I understand you have to make the money for the company, but you can't tell me I haven't helped you here. I haven't supported you. I haven't told you what's going to occur or what could possibly occur as well too. So that's kind of where I lay effective communication and automation. That's my niche. That's what I like to do. Be it on-prem, on cloud applications. I love working with engineers as well too. So that's my life right now.
Oh, that's awesome. And in the last 90
Yeah.
seconds, how about you, Chris? What's your niche? What gets you going every day, regardless of what security role you're playing?
The bigger, the nastier the problem, the happier I am. I love taking on the problems nobody else wants to deal with. I love transforming teams from dysfunctional to high performing. Those are the things that get me up every day. It doesn't feel like work, it's just a puzzle. Right? Like I said, the gnarlier, the better. And everybody that runs, I'm raising my hand. That's how I've basically built my career. All of the things that have helped me grow have come from taking on the things nobody else wanted to do. People literally leaving a role, and I'm like, you know what? I'll take it on, because one way to look at it is you can't mess it up if it's already broken.
Right.
Right? So why not spend a little time experimenting and trying some new things in the hope that you can at least move the bar a little bit? It doesn't mean I'm always successful, but I definitely always learn something big. Sometimes you just have to give up and say, we got to divest from this tech. But at the end of the day, I learned so much by just taking on hard problems.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think we'll all agree there's a lot of big, gnarly, nasty problems out there in security. There always will be. They're always going to change. And so I think we all need to embrace that reality. So hopefully today everybody's been inspired, learned a little bit. I know I sure did about, some of these emerging risks and threats, how we can be thinking about them foundationally and how we can prepare for them and continue to mature our careers. Cameron, Chris, I want to thank you both for joining this morning. It's been a great session, and we wish you all, have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Cool.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mike.
guys. Yep.
Thanks,
See
Karen.
everybody.
See
Thanks,
ya.
Chris. See you later.